good evening to you and to the commissioners and to members of the public in the audience tonight or who will be watching this online in the near future. We're not quite streaming live yet, but we will be soon. I would say it gives me great pleasure to stand before you with this recommended budget, and there is a sense of satisfaction I get from working week in and week out with you, with dozens of our staff, and with members of the public to try to shape an organization and annual budgets that can meet the community's needs, but it is serious and difficult work. Still, I'm glad that we have made it to this point and glad to be presenting a budget that is broadly reflective of commissioners' desires for this community and this organization, a budget that I believe will help get Granville up to speed. On our agenda tonight, will begin with a recap of this year's budget, as well as the big rocks your staff have been moving this year. I will review the timeline we have followed and will be following for development and approval of this budget. Then there is the financial backdrop for this budget and the key needs and issues driving the proposed budget. I will highlight all key aspects included in the budget and wrap up by boiling this budget proposal down to its essential components for all to see. We kept the tax rate steady this year, and in fact, in every year since the last reval in 2018. In the end, particularly due to some unforeseen circumstances that arose very close to budget adoption last year, the county had to appropriate more of our fund balance to balance this year's budget than I would have liked. Also, had we known how poorly sales tax and our Medicaid hold harmless funds from the state were going to perform, we would likely have had to raise taxes in the current year or make harmful cuts to key county operations. In the current year, we held the fire tax steady at 6 cents, and I will propose keeping it there, even considering the recently completed reval. In the current year, we provided nearly $1 million in additional operating funds to Granville County Public Schools, and I will note that about 25% of that funding gets passed along to charters throughout the region attended by Granville County students. And finally, we made major improvements this year to our public safety salaries because we had no choice. The competition for new recruits and to retain experienced public safety talent was fierce and actually still is. Of note, our raises were greatest at the lower end of the salary scale because that is where our recruitment challenges were most pronounced. In the current fiscal year, we began adding to our employee 401k match offering, an area where our benefits lag far behind our competitors, and I hope we can continue that movement in next year's budget. Additionally, until this year, we were charging employees over $12,000 a year to get health insurance for their families. For obvious reasons, not very many were taking us up on it. I'm not sure how the others were insuring their families, but I hope you will agree with me that situation, among other salary and benefit considerations, was actively harming us in our recruitment efforts. The 4% cost of living adjustment and 4% merit pool may have appeared generous, but looked at another way, even a top-performing employee was barely staying ahead of last year's high inflation. Finally, we reached a crisis point with DSS recruitment and retention this past year, with neighboring jurisdictions to the south offering signing bonuses and starting salaries $10,000 to $15,000 higher than ours. We made some mid-year adjustments, and I was glad we were able to do that, but you don't need me to tell you that plenty of people are perfectly happy to commute an extra 30, 45, or even 60 minutes a day for that kind of raise. Happily, the pay increases seem to have had the desired effect, and I was talking to the DSS director just a few days ago, and for the first time in a long time, DSS is close to being fully staffed. As just discussed, employee pay and benefits have continued to be a primary focus for me and for commissioners. That commitment comes at some cost, but I would point out that not trying hard to keep up would also involve a significant cost to this community. Relatively high turnover rates would go even higher, and we would have much more trouble filling those vacancies. A further challenge this year has been the paltry growth of sales tax revenue, which has grown at less than half of the 8% growth rate we and others across the state had predicted. Slumping sales tax growth has also contributed to greatly reduced Medicaid hold harmless payments from the state, which we budgeted flat, but which have gone backwards nearly $1 million. These lost revenues were revenues we hoped would replace some of the one-time funding we used to balance the current year's budget. And while we hope these revenues will do better next year, we have to budget more conservatively in light of where we are right now. On the upside, we have successfully completed our transition to enterprise fleet management and continue to reap the operational and financial benefits of that program, including approximately $250,000 in savings in the first year. We also rebid our landfill operations contract this year. This was an extremely complex process, but along with the adjustments in our solid waste fees and tipping fees charged at the landfill, this new contract will help put our solid waste enterprise fund truly in the black for the first time, including the creation of reserves for future expansions at the landfill. Among others, I want to thank Environmental Services Director Jason Falls for managing current operations and this extremely complex RFP process while working 3 days a week for Granville County. Your management team has managed a large number of critical department head transitions this year, including hiring a new economic development director, social services director, chief financial officer, veteran service officer, and managing the recent departure of our 911 emergency communications director. We have staffed up our Department of Social Services to meet the additional workload entailed by Medicaid expansion, though I'm happy to note that these positions are fully funded through additional reimbursements and funding from the state. We have done much work drafting a development agreement for roughly a quarter of the land within our Triangle North Business Park, a deal we hope will close this summer. Waterline extensions are underway, paid for entirely with funds received as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. Furthermore, with an $11.5 million appropriation from our state legislature, Vane-Granville Community College is forging ahead with design of a new advanced manufacturing center for the park. Overall, I know we are all happy to see our primary business park finally being developed. Your staff, especially Deputy County Manager Karina Weichel, have continued to shepherd along broadband expansion work in the county, work which involves a complicated web of state officials, internet service providers, federal regulations, and citizens wanting to know when fiber will come to their house. I'm happy to say that hundreds, if not thousands, of homes have already been able to connect to high-speed internet as a result of these efforts, and thousands more connections are in the works over the next few years. Commissioners and staff and the county's financial advisors have worked hard over this past year to develop a draft capital improvement plan, or CIP, that is very near completion. Adoption of this pending CIP will represent vastly improved and focused planning for building and financing facilities that will benefit generations of Granvillians to come. I'll share more about this proposed CIP later in the presentation, but I would like to end the review of the current year by observing how happy we all are that work on the North Granville Senior Center is proceeding. This is an excellent example of the kind of capital project we hope to continue investing in. The average household in Granville County will pay less than $1 a month so that seniors and other residents in a large section of our county can have a vibrant and much improved activity hub. So overall, county staff have been extremely busy this year and have achieved a remarkable number of key milestones for the county. I'm proud of them and the progress we've made together. The development of each year's budget takes a full 5 to 6 months worth of work. Earnest work begins with the development of departmental budgets in January. Each department's budget is gone over in great detail with finance and administration during February and March. And during the second part of March and the month of April, we revisit all revenue trends and start to formulate a recommended budget. In the month of April, I also sit with each of you to try to make sure that county administration has heard your preferences clearly and that we are bringing you the budget you think the county needs. Though it would require significant new investment by the county and thus by county residents, I believe that the budget I'm presenting tonight is the budget the county needs and is the budget that commissioners directly or indirectly have indicated they desire. That said, it's not possible for an $85 to $90 million a year organization to get all the details just right, and I know that commissioners and members of the public will have many questions about this proposed budget. To discuss and answer those questions, we have 3 full-day budget work sessions scheduled for next Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and also a public hearing 2 weeks from tonight where members of the public can comment on the proposed budget. 2 weeks after that, this board will hopefully adopt the final budget for fiscal year 24-25, and right up through the point of adoption, they may consider and make changes to the budget. Now I want to share with you some important financial and demographic backdrops to this year's budget. These include decelerating revenue growth, rapid growth in property values, and the significant levels of inflation and income growth since our last reval. Outside of the property tax, which we can control, sales taxes are the next largest revenue source for Granville County. They do continue to increase, but the growth this year and the growth projected for next year are far below the 7-year averages shown. We can hope for a miraculous recovery of sales tax, but as a wise person once said, hope is not a strategy, so we will budget conservatively and hope for the best. Medicaid hold harmless funds, which are a combined product of sales taxes and Medicaid-related payments the state makes back to the federal government, have actually gone backwards to the tune of roughly $1 million this year, with a further drop anticipated next year. So what are the implications of these trends? Well, the fund balance replenishment we had hoped for through continued growth of these revenue sources simply did not occur. And in anything but the short run, one-time revenues must be replaced with recurring revenues or expenditures must be cut. That brings us inevitably to our property tax, the only recurring revenue we truly control. This year's reval represents an important opportunity to reset. Why is it an important opportunity to reset? Because tax values and the tax rate have remained absolutely flat for the past 6 years while incomes have risen. Because inflation and the cost of doing business has gone up sharply. Because the cost of hiring and retaining good people has gone up sharply. Because a growing and aging population that is no longer quite so rural is demanding more and better services. And because the opportunity to position Granville County for its best future is, in my view, also at stake. That is why it is such an important opportunity to reset. This chart is a good demonstration of how, since the last reval, property taxes have covered a lower and lower percentage of our county budgets. This is inflation at work, not a county government gone wild. A paramedic today costs a lot more than a paramedic did 6 years ago. In 2022 alone, Wake County offered their EMS employees average pay raises of over 20%. One may say, we're not Wake County. True enough, but we compete with them whether we want to or not. Anyone paying attention knows that paramedics and law enforcement officers and firefighters and every other kind of employee is happy to drive 30 or 40 minutes down whatever road they have to in order to make that much more money. As I mentioned earlier, DSS departments in adjacent counties have been offering signing bonuses of $5,000 and up, as well as salaries starting significantly above ours. We see it every day, and in my view, we have no alternative but to try to compete, as we did with some mid-year DSS salary adjustments and recruitment and retention bonuses this year. That said, we are still operating lean and mean in many, many areas of the county government. We have 3 full-time people and a handful of part-time cleaners responsible for over 400,000 square feet of building space, and we're down one of those full-time people who doubled his pay recently when he shifted over to the private sector. We have a 3-person HR department doing everything under the sun, also down 1 employee. We have many other 1 and 2 and 3-person departments carrying out critical work for the county, departments where the loss of even a single person can mean very significant risk for county operations. As you know, we did a survey of county employees recently, and the #1 emotion reflected back at us was exhaustion. As a manager, when I see and hear feedback like that, I know that we all need to pay attention and proceed with caution and with thoughtfulness regarding the health of our organization. In terms of the portion of our budget being carried by the property tax, even the budget I'm proposing for next year does not take us back to where we were in the year or 2 after the last reval. Again, important context for the decisions in front of us. While the Office of State Management and Budget predicts more modest growth, here in Granville County we have a heightened awareness of the new subdivisions coming out of the ground and being approved in all of our larger communities. In the south, some development will have to wait for the completion of the large sewer lines being constructed under I-85, but based on conversations with our towns and cities, even a fairly conservative estimate could result in 10,000 more residents living here by the end of this decade. This, too, should spur us to consider the infrastructure that will be necessary for our growing population. So, how do we decide what Granville County must fund and should fund now, or in any year? We know and accept that there are a number of critical services and functions that we, as taxpayers and governing officials of this county, are obliged to provide at an adequate level. Adequate, of course, is subject to interpretation, and our consensus definition is what we're always zeroing in on through all of our conversations together. We have to maintain stable county operations, which means we need to maintain sufficient staff and adequate facilities needed to provide programs and services, many of which are mandated by the state statute. I've already noted some of the difficulties we face in recruiting and retaining talent, which is obviously a major part of maintaining a stable operation. If we lose 20 or 30% of our staff in a given area, the remaining staff will burn out even more quickly and will soon be looking for ways to exit. And believe me, in this job market, with unemployment at historic lows, there are always ways to exit. We have to provide adequate fire protection, law enforcement, and EMS funding across 532 square miles. I know we pride ourselves in our self-sufficiency, but when your loved one is having a heart attack, you do not want to hear that we don't have enough ambulances to get to your part of the county quickly. Our tax base has to provide sufficient funds for over 8,500 school children. If we don't pay enough to hire and retain good teachers, who, by the way, also work in a regional market, guess what? They vote with their feet. And we don't even have warm bodies, never mind talented teachers, to make sure the next generations of Granvillians can succeed. Additionally, even if we're not building new schools, we have to maintain the 1 million+ square feet of building space our students are currently learning in. The county is on the hook for all of that. The same is largely true for Vane-Granville Community College, the post-secondary destination of the largest percentage of our high school graduates. We pay for 25% of main campus expenses and 100% of the South Campus expenses, and it adds up. Finally, developing and funding and implementing a plan to meet our community's longer-term capital needs is also an important part of this proposed budget. A decent retirement plan is an important part of any employer's benefit package, and a 401k plan is an important part of that. Even with the current year increase to 2%, Granville County is still well behind our competitors in terms of 401k matching. In the last 6 months, we almost lost a critical hire because of this. To continue slowly moving us towards a place where our retirement benefits do not actively harm our recruitment efforts, I am recommending our 401k match increase from 2 to 3% next year. In addition to the proposed increase in 401k match, I am proposing a merit pool offering raises up to 4% for truly exemplary work. As the leader of an organization filled with many wonderful, hardworking people, I believe it is critical to offer merit raises for employees who distinguish themselves in their service to the community and the organization. Unfortunately, part of our baseline budget for next year has to account for significant increases in what it costs to insure our employees. Healthcare costs continue to rise. The basic cost to offer our employees the same set of health benefits next year has risen 8%. Granville County, which is self-insured, also had a very rough year for claims, which in turn means that the reserves needed to cover next year's estimated claims must also go up. One might say, well, just cut benefits. We already don't have particularly generous benefits. It still costs over $9,000 a year for an employee of Granville County to cover a spouse and children. We lost a critical department head hire this year who had already verbally committed to the job, but when she reviewed our benefits package, realized that even with a decent pay increase, our health benefits, such as they are, meant her total compensation would not increase at all. I say that to say that I do not believe offering decent health care to our employees is a luxury. It is a necessity. It is also the right thing to do. With fire protection and our still relatively new fire district tax, I'm proposing, despite a revenue-neutral rate of 3.9 cents, that we stay with the current fire district tax of 6 cents. Maintaining that tax rate will provide our 12 volunteer fire departments with approximately $1.3 million more to provide fire protection across our 532 square miles. The era of being able to do this on the cheap is over. The average age of volunteer firefighters is going up, and there are fewer of them. The vast majority of our current fleet of fire trucks, though lovingly maintained, is over 20 years old. Our fire protection system desperately needs this additional investment. And what would we get with that additional fire tax revenue? Although the process of hiring and deploying weekday fire drivers is still ramping up and will continue throughout next year, those departments using this allowance the most are already seeing shorter response times. Up to $40,000 is available to each department to ensure we are leveraging the greatest amount of state and federal grant funding possible. Up through this year, for example, we've been leaving approximately half of that money on the table every year for lack of adequate matching funds. Because it is so important to our broader medical response system that our firefighters be trained and available medical responders, the Fire Commission has recommended raising the allocation for participating departments to $20,000 per year. As approved by the Fire Commission and County Commissioners, enhancement funding allocations vary based on area, call volume, tax value, population, and so forth, and over time will enable departments shouldering a heavier and steadier load for residents of this county to pay for the additional staffing and equipment necessary to carry that load more sustainably. Additionally, in the coming year, the Fire Commission will continue to look at use of fire tax funding reserves to complete the fire coverage map for Granville County. This slide simply shows the increasing revenue going into fire protection over the past several years with the institution of the fire tax. With the exception of the municipal departments who receive limited support from the fire tax for calls that they run out into the county, all of our volunteer departments now have the potential to draw down 2 or 3 or even 4 times the revenue available to them 3 years ago. That may seem like a lot, but consider that prior to the institution of the fire tax, departments were running for an entire year on 80-odd thousand county dollars, maybe 5 or 10,000 in donations, and whatever grant dollars they could figure out how to match. Again, with aging volunteers, fewer volunteers, aging apparatus, and more complex fires and emergencies to respond to, I firmly believe this additional funding is essential if we want our fire departments to be there when we need them. Granville County is fortunate to have a healthy local hospital. We're one of a shrinking handful of communities in the state of North Carolina that has such an institution. We're doubly fortunate that Granville Health System agreed a number of years ago to operate the EMS system for Granville County, and we are triply fortunate that they are able to help support this operation financially. Were Granville County to have to operate this system on our own again, we would be looking at several multiples of the numbers up on the screen right now. In addition to the significant increases in operational funding over the past several years, the county continues to invest in a newer and larger fleet of ambulances. Without these enhancements and with the growth in our population, response times would continue to get longer and longer. The increases shown in fiscal 24-25 include 1 additional ambulance for our system, as well as 3/4 of a year worth of 24/7 staffing for that ambulance. I would remind commissioners and the public that for every 24/7 position required, nearly 5 employees are required to fill that position. As such, putting 2 people on this new ambulance day in and day out for a year requires 9 new EMTs and/or paramedics to be hired. Emergency medical response is a necessity, but it's not a cheap service to provide. And now an ever-present and incredibly important part of this conversation, which is the Board of County Commissioners' support for education. As you all know, K-12 education in the state of North Carolina is largely state-funded. Typically, state funding makes up about 60% of the school's funding, federal funding about 10%, with local and other funds making up the remainder. I will note that the state has historically not been terribly generous with teacher pay, lottery fund distributions, recognition of advanced degrees, and other aspects, important aspects of school finance. Granville County Commissioners have sought over time to provide substantial additional funding to the schools. And since the advent of charter schools, a large and growing portion of that funding has also been transferred on a per-pupil basis to charter schools attended by Granville County students. As you can see in this table, the total number of school-age students enrolled in traditional public schools and charters has remained fairly steady over the past 5 years. County funding, however, has regularly increased each year by an average of roughly $840,000 per year. My recommended budget for next fiscal year includes an increase in current expense funding of nearly $1 million, though $295,000 for SROs that used to flow through the school's budget will now simply flow straight through the sheriff's office. Additional recommended funding for next year includes the third year of a 3-year commitment commissioners previously agreed to help with salary compression. Along with fulfilling that $499,000 commitment, I'm also recommending $494,000 in additional funding to reimburse the schools for increased benefit costs and to help make sure locally funded positions receive the same 4% pay raises funded this year by the state. This recommended operating funding for the schools represents 22 cents of next year's tax rate, more than a third of the total burden for our community. I don't point this out because I think it's inappropriate. I point it out to make more obvious the level of local commitment to our schools and also the level of interest our commissioners take in the strategic decision-making of the Board of Education. In addition to the significant increase in current expense funding for the schools, I'm recommending that the county make significantly larger investments in meeting long-deferred capital needs in our public school system. I believe commissioners and the Board of Education agree that the likely need for new schools is small, but the need to keep up the schools we have is very important to our children's success. This year, in consultation with the superintendent, I am recommending nearly a 75% increase in the long-term dedicated funding for building maintenance, including funding for more regular replacement of roofs and HVAC systems, many of which are long overdue. With the schools maintaining over 1 million square feet of buildings, the funding provided historically has simply not been enough to adequately maintain the spaces where our children learn. And I'm fearful that continuing this approach would lead to numerous school-level crises that could significantly disrupt learning for large numbers of students. Debt service for schools is declining, and that decrease helps pay for some of the increased capital funding. Additional funding for the purchase of longer-lasting assets, such as roofs and HVAC systems, would come through dedicated funding in our soon-to-be-adopted capital improvement plan. In and through this proposed budget, I believe the Granville County Board of County Commissioners, acting on behalf of the citizens of this county, will continue to appropriately uphold their part of this bargain by committing a truly significant portion of the funding at their disposal to help provide Granville County students an excellent education. We look forward to further partnerships and further exploration of ways the multi-year trend in enrollment may possibly be reversed. It will require both boards to entertain some truly challenging thoughts and be ready to work thoughtfully together for the benefit of this community. I know that school resource officers, also known as SROs, continue to be a much discussed topic in our community. Though my recommended budget does not propose an increase in the number of county-funded SROs, we very much hope that additional state funding will become available this coming year to supplement local resources. Ongoing conversations with our municipalities are bearing fruit, and in addition to providing SROs to schools in their communities, I hope the municipalities can also begin to fund a portion of those positions through their local budgets. I'm thankful to Sheriff Fountain for making sure that the staff identified to serve this critical function in schools receive appropriate training, and we're working together to make sure that the staff that have been dedicated to this function are present all day, every day in those schools. As noted in this recommended budget, we also continue to meet our obligations to Vane-Granville Community College. Through this recommended budget, we would meet the full facility operations request for both campuses in which we have a stake, which is 25% of the main campus needs and 100% of the South Campus needs. Deferred capital needs at the main campus continue to grow, and for several years running, Vance County has been unable to fund any portion of this request. As of today, those deferred and ever more urgent needs total just under $6 million. Though I have discussed this situation with President Damaris and Vance County Manager Renee Perry, I'm not certain how or when the two counties will move forward with a concrete plan to meet these needs. What I cannot do, in good faith, is bring forward a fiscal 24-25 budget and also a 10-year capital improvement plan where we do not budget to meet this very clear capital need on our horizon. As such, the proposed CIP and the additional dedicated funding for capital contained in it contains $400,000 per year for Vane-Granville Community College's facility needs. Next year, those funds would allow us to meet the larger facility maintenance needs at the South Campus, but beyond next year, this $400,000 per year will represent a source of funding for Granville County to meet at least its portion of the broader capital needs on Vane-Granville's main campus. Talking about capital investments in the schools and community college leads me to another critical part of this budget, the proposed 10-year capital improvement plan and associated funding plan. It was apparent to me when I started with Granville County 18 months ago that there were many pent-up capital needs across the community. There was a long-delayed North Granville Senior Center. We hadn't set aside enough funding for a landfill expansion. We needed more fire stations. There were no and still aren't any recreational facilities in numerous areas of the county, including some of the fastest growing areas. Numerous county facilities needed major work or to be demolished altogether, and the courthouse, despite seeing greatly increased traffic, had not been expanded or renovated since the 1980s. Here and there, we had squirreled away little bits of money to help fund some of those things, but never enough to actually complete them, and not through a process that prioritized projects and figured out what level of and configuration of funding would actually allow any of these investments to move forward. Our staff and commissioners have spent a great deal of time this past year working with our financial advisors to improve upon that state of affairs. Our current debt service payments total about $9 million a year, primarily for schools, but also for our law enforcement complex. Luckily for us, that debt service starts to taper off quickly in the coming years. By maintaining that same level of funding dedicated to capital and dedicating 2 additional pennies to this capital improvement plan, Granville County can fund a wide variety of much-needed capital projects moving forward. You can see here the critical county projects proposed to be funded through this plan. Again, with good planning, careful execution, and 2 additional pennies on our tax rate dedicated to capital, this CIP is an investment we can make in the future of Granville County, is an investment I think we should make in the future of Granville County. A capital plan is just that, a plan, but also a sophisticated one with funding and logistics behind it. Commissioners have looked at about 5 different versions of this CIP, and staff have looked at many more. We have a few final tweaks to make, but I anticipate that commissioners will approve a finalized version of this plan early in the next fiscal year. Beyond much-needed funding increases for fire protection and EMS, beyond providing for reasonable increases in operating funds for the schools, beyond providing more planfully and adequately for the capital needs of the schools and Vane-Granville Community College, beyond a funded capital improvement plan investing in the future of our county, beyond basic merit pay and a small increase in retirement benefit that still leaves us lagging behind our neighbors, Beyond meeting those basic needs and obligations of our community and our employees, there are very few expansions of any sort proposed in this recommended budget. There are a very small number of new positions proposed, a remarkably small set of department expansions, and not a whole lot else. For staffing, I am proposing the creation of 3 new positions, each of which is either partially or fully covered by outside revenues. The Assistant Director for Development Services, critical for our succession planning and also for implementation of the proposed CIP, will be covered 100% with fee revenue from new development around the county. To have no assistant or deputy director in an organization of over 100 employees involving a complex web of state and federal regulations and requirements is short-sighted and, in my professional opinion, puts the county at risk. And hence I am recommending a new deputy director for DSS. In addition, the social work program administrator position will provide leadership for a division that has never had one, as well as providing a wide range of critical functions across the department. And both of these employees' positions will be reimbursed at least a 50% rate by the state. One other small change in our budget is to add small wage increases for hard-to-fill hourly positions. In many cases, take hourly election workers as an example. Paying so little that we can't fill positions at all or have to scrape the bottom of the barrel, again, puts our county at risk in ways that I do not think are wise. In addition to some smaller tweaks and simplifications to our overall fee schedule, there are also a few notable changes that I do think it is appropriate to draw your attention to. Small increases are proposed this coming year for both solid waste and stormwater fees. On the solid waste side, both households that have trash pickup service and those that rely solely on county convenience centers will have small increases of between $3 to $9 per year. As noted, these are part of the revenue stream that will allow our Solid Waste Enterprise Fund to be truly self-sustaining in years to come. Stormwater fees have been flat for over a decade and historically have never covered the cost of watershed protection services provided by the county and Granville-Vance Public Health Department. All of the basic services are provided county-wide, with additional services and administrative requirements within the Falls watershed being covered by significantly higher fees for residents in that southern third of the county. Here too, the annual increase in fees, which are tied to the size, location, and amount of impervious surface associated with a project, is relatively small. In addition to the minimal staffing additions mentioned a few slides ago, there are a smattering of very minor expansions within departmental budgets, and there are important reasons for each. We have $5,000 for our portion of a seasonal 4-H position, most of which is funded by the state and part of which will also be covered by Person County. We have $10,000 so we can provide basic safety supplies in county buildings, including periodic replacement of defibrillator batteries when they need them. The IT security measures were mostly planned, but a significant intrusion into the county network this past February strengthened our resolve to make some additional targeted investments to enhance our IT security, harden our network, and improve our recovery capabilities. Though this budget is not able to fund the vast majority of proposed expansions from the Granville County Sheriff's Office, I do think a modest increase in the sheriff's overtime budget would put that part of his budget more in line with historical averages. Generally, our outside agency partners are held completely flat in this year's proposed budget. Per a multi-year funding agreement, however, Granville-Vance Public Health will receive an additional $25,000. This brings their total annual funding from Granville County to $950,000, which I will remind everyone is a fraction of what we would be paying if we had to support our own in-house public health department. During COVID, the county gave area congregations in ministry an additional $40,000 in ARPA funding to help provide additional food aid through its Backpack Food Buddies program, which provides enough food for healthy weekend meals for children who receive the bulk of their weekly nutrition at school. ACIM has asked the county to continue at that COVID funding level, and while I'm not sure we can fund all of that request, I am recommending an additional $15,000 on top of the normal $10,000 to try to make sure no child in Granville County goes hungry. Finally, a modicum of support for the Camp Butner Historical Society will help ensure the survival of this small museum commemorating and carrying forward the important military history of the southwestern part of our county. And I see the KARTS advocates are still here. After a bump in funding last year, next year's funding for the Car Area Rural Transportation System, or KARTS, is back down to historic levels, with identical contributions being made by Franklin, Vance, and Warren counties. Granville County's contribution is for a combination of administrative costs and a portion of the cost to replace some of their aging fleet of buses, most of which have over 250,000 miles on them. Additionally, a state grant flows through Granville County to help pay for the Oxford Loop, and conversations with KARTS continue as we look for funding for a similar level of service for our South Granville communities. Residents and commissioners in the southern part of the county have had growing concerns for many years about road capacity, dangerous intersections, and growth. A $40,000 match from Granville County will help leverage over $200,000 from the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, or CAMPO, to take a careful look at traffic and other interrelated systems in the southeastern portion of Granville County. The study's results should help us better understand both opportunities and limitations for traffic, housing, utilities, and growth in general. I want to be clear that there are a great many proposed additions to our budget that I am not recommending funding for. I'm not recommending a cost of living adjustment and lower costs for employees to insure their families. I am not recommending an increase in our local teacher supplements. I am not recommending funding for nearly $2 million in additional staffing and other enhancements requested by the sheriff, nor for the vast majority of new position requests from our county departments. I am not recommending more generous funding to almost any of our local nonprofits, all of whom provide important services to this community on shoestring budgets. And I am not recommending funding for a great number of sensible proposals for operational improvements and service enhancements submitted by our county departments. I know this is a lot to swallow, and I know there will be pressure to reduce this proposed increase, but I would leave you with a few thoughts. It's easy to say that if outside revenues decline, we should simply cut expenditures rather than make those up with local revenues. As the manager and as commissioners, we could do that, but we would be responsible for figuring out what to cut and shouldering the burden of the consequences. As I said earlier, I believe that a robust capital improvement plan is an important investment to benefit future generations of Granville residents, children, our grandchildren. Those 2 cents can go away, but then what? How will we pay when the schools or Vance-Granville Community College comes to us with critical capital needs? What will we tell residents and students and youth athletes in South Granville who desperately need recreational facilities? What do we do when the senior resident Superior Court judge demands adequate space to hold court in Granville County and meet the justice needs of our residents? With regard to operational increases, those too can go away. But without any pay increases, with expensive family health benefits and lower than usual retirement benefits, how could we expect anything other than a turnover rate higher than we already experience, as well as greater difficulty recruiting talent? Without additional EMS enhancements and with population and call volume increasing, are we prepared for longer and longer wait times for medical assistance to arrive at our homes? My own preference is always to find the most planful way possible to meet the community's needs. Some would say, keep my taxes low. I don't want additional services anyway. But we know that there are people in our community who desperately need these services. We know it takes time and money and planning to build facilities. Lord knows it took us 7 to 8 years to get where we are today with the little North Granville Senior Center. I think in the past, we have sometimes tried to avoid and delay the obvious. Not only do I not subscribe to that approach and not recommend that you, as the Board of County Commissioners, use it, but there is no free lunch. All of our decisions are chickens that eventually come home to roost. My job as manager is to do my very best to understand your preferences, understand the community's needs, understand this organization's dynamics, and to manage all of that, including the budget required to meet those preferences and needs as best I can. Though I acknowledge there will be some financial and political pain involved in adopting the budget I am proposing or something close to it, I do not see attractive alternatives. I would also like to provide some additional important context for this proposed budget and tax rate. The proposed fire tax rate is still nearly the lowest around. The only exception that I have found are lower rates in a very small number of small, high-value fire districts who can provide the service for themselves at a lower rate. By leaving the fire tax at 6 cents following the reval, the owner of a $300,000 house would pay $5.75 more per month to help strengthen the volunteer fire department that will respond to their house and help save their most important investment if they have a fire. The proposed county property tax rate of 63.1 cents will still be equal to or lower than most of our neighboring counties. Person County will likely be at around 75 cents. Vance County will likely end up where we are or higher. Franklin County may well be a little lower, but then they have experienced even sharper rates of commercial and residential growth in recent years. Durham County will be well above us, and Wake County will probably land above us as well, both of them with property values significantly beyond ours. With this proposed county tax rate, that same owner of a $300,000 house will pay an extra $22 per month to help put meeting the capital needs of our schools and community college on autopilot, to help fund courthouse renovations, much-needed recreation facilities, and help our county not lose the bidding war for local talent by funding modest merit pay, a small increase in our 401k match rate, and helping our health benefits not go backwards. We are getting Granville County up to speed. I want to reiterate that inflation, incomes, and property values have all grown over the past 6 years, while property taxes have remained flat. That trajectory is unsustainable. The property tax must continue to bear an appropriate portion of the burden of sustaining the community. Our towns and cities are in a similar boat. Growth is picking up. Infrastructure is lagging behind. Without infrastructure, there is no growth. Without growth, our revenues and opportunities diminish. But infrastructure and the people to help operate and maintain it cost money. My colleagues in Oxford, Butner, and Creedmoor are recognizing this. At least your colleagues on the boards of all 5 municipalities also recognize this. At least with the 3 larger communities, the majority will end up much closer to their historical tax rates than the revenue neutral rates. I recognize, and I know commissioners recognize, that this budget represents a big lift for the community. We talk every week and every month all year long about the community's needs. We talk about how to find the right balance as we use the levers available to county government to ensure that Granville County remains a healthy, thriving community. It isn't easy. There may be plenty of critics of this budget. They're welcome to come to our work sessions and/or to the public hearing on the budget. They're welcome to talk to their commissioners, and many of them do. They're welcome to contact me, and many of them do. Doing the public's business is difficult work, but we take it very seriously and try to do the very best job we can. Across all the work of 27 departments, we don't always get every detail right, but we try to, and when mistakes are pointed out, we try hard to create an environment where those same mistakes aren't made again. And that's it. I know it's a lot, and I acknowledge that I and we are looking at a tax increase of some magnitude. Former Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes of the United States Supreme Court once said, "I like paying taxes. With them, I buy civilization." That's what we're trying to do here, in local government, in education, in everything we do or attempt to do. We get what we pay for. I appreciate the time you've given me this evening. I appreciate the departments whose hard work we benefit from every day and who spent many hours shaping almost entirely flat budgets. I deeply appreciate Deputy County Manager Karina Weikel's efforts to organize the chaos and make sure that all the little parts add up to a coherent whole. I appreciate Management Analyst David Scheck-Snyder's speedy research, counsel, and visualization efforts that have contributed greatly to our work and to this presentation. I appreciate Deborah Weary, Karen Evans, Audrey Hill, and all the others who've pitched in with production assistance and innumerable acts of generosity pretty much on an hourly basis over these past weeks and months. So what's next? We have 2 budget work sessions scheduled for Monday and Wednesday next week here at the Expo, and a 3rd work session on Thursday if we need it. We have the budget public hearing 2 weeks from tonight on May 20th, and God willing, we will adopt next year's budget 4 weeks from tonight on June 3rd. Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioners, this concludes my presentation of the fiscal year 24-25 recommended budget. Thank you so much.